Looking at the book of Nehemiah, trying to identify traces of grace that we find within that book. We began with this, the fact that experiential grace, the experience of grace, usually is surrounded around some element of pain, discomfort, trouble, turmoil. Usually something goes wrong for us to experience the grace of God. We may know about it, we may comprehend it, we may study it, but experientially, usually it revolves around some incident of discomfort. We also looked at the fact that that discomfort then transforms itself into prayer. And we found that Nehemiah, once he was troubled by the condition of the city of Jerusalem, that he immediately went to the Father in prayer. And he prayed a very specific prayer. He confessed in that prayer. He asked for forgiveness and sought to reclaim the promise of God in that prayer. We also talked last week about the fact that Nehemiah is really a great example of a person of grace. The amazing nature that this man had was truly a person of grace, and we identified some characteristics of that graceful nature that he possessed. This week, the plan was to talk about the prompting of grace. Now, one might think, with all that's gone on this last week, I would have changed my lesson. But why should I? So we're going to continue in the book of Grace and the book of Nehemiah, and talk about how grace is intended to motivate and prompt us. It opens pained hearts. Grace hears praying hearts. Grace longs to change hearts. And grace prompts prepared hearts with specific motivations. The grace of God is involved in prompting us in our service to Him. A couple of weeks ago on Wednesday evening, and if you noticed, our classes on Wednesday night have been discussing our lessons. Well, a couple of weeks ago when I was sick and Bill preached, I had to come up with a class because I hadn't preached that Sunday. So I want to just summarize some of what we hit in that class, because it's really amazing to me that the prompting work of God's grace has always been the plan. It's always been the plan of God to accomplish that. We read through Moses' account of creation in the book of Genesis, and we find that after God specifically created things, what did He proclaim? And God said, it was good. It was good. And again, just to share some of those, Genesis chapter 1 and verse 12, he talks about the vegetation and the plants yielding seed. And then he says, and God saw that it was good. We go farther down to verse 16. There were two great lights that were made, and God saw that it was good. Verse 21, He made the great sea monsters and the living creatures and the fish that swarmed in the water. And God saw it, and God said, it was good. And then verse 25, He made the beasts of the earth and the cattle and the creeping things on the ground. And God saw that it was good. Every time God created something, He identified it as being good. Now, have you ever wondered what it was that God meant when He said it was good? Why was He pronouncing that particular thing good? Was it God doing that a boy God, good job to Himself? Behold, this is good. Good job, God. You did well. Was he praising Himself? Obviously, that's silliness gone to seed. Did He have to pause and look to see if it was good? Did He have to figure it out? Make the light, make the vegetation, make the animals. Now, is that good? No, that is pretty good. Did he have to concentrate, process to see if something was good? Was it really just an experiment? I'm going to see if I can create some stuff, and then testing. Oh, it turned out pretty well. Had God done it before when it wasn't so good? Was there another attempt at creation, and God looked and said, ooh, that's not so good? What did God mean when He said, it is good? When He's created all of this stuff and He says, it is good, what was the goodness of all creation? In creation, the God of all grace, 1 Peter 5:10, reveals the limitlessness and unqualified dimensions of His grace. In other words, there is absolutely no one event in history other than perhaps the gift of his own Son that illustrates the complete nature of God's grace more than the goodness of creation. Creation was good in the widest sense, is what the Hebrew word means. Now, we get down to verse 26. After God's pronounced all this good, Genesis chapter 1 begins, then God said. Then God said. Well, what's so significant about the then? Well, let's consider it. Then, as if after everything is now ready. Then, as in the stage is all set. The stars have been made, the planets are floating, the water is here, the land has appeared, the creatures have all been. Then, as in everything is the way it needs to be. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made. Behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. What did God mean when everything was good? Well, God created a world, a universe, and then he filled it with goodness. He made it perfect for sustaining human life. Then he created man and he gave it all away. He gave it to humanity. Why? We get a little hint. Romans chapter 1 says that we look at the creation and we see God. He gave it away because this whole creation prompts us to consider the grace of God. Who of us has not watched a sunrise, a sunset, been in the mountains and witnessed the closeness of the stars and the planets and their brightness? Who of us has not been in one of those environments and thought to ourselves, this is God? Well, more specifically, it's God's grace. It's God's grace. He made it all good so that he could give it to mankind and it could become the prompter for humanity to be motivated to serve him. The text reveals that this beginning grace offered man purpose. He tells man to fill the earth, to subdue it, and to rule over it. It also offers a principle. He created all of this and he made one tree, one no tree. I asked in the Wednesday night class how many yes trees there were and nobody had the answer. Just one tree. You know, that lets me know that the more that God's grace abounds, the fewer no's there are. And then also there was a plan. You remember after Adam and Eve sinned, God's grace, he didn't pull the rug out from under his grace. He didn't give them what they deserved. He had said they would die. But instead, he had made a decision to let someone else die. And that plan involved the seed of woman, his own son. So, grace initially has its prompting power in the very beginning in all that God creates. But how does grace prompt Nehemiah to his task? Let's consider some specific things. First of all, grace led Nehemiah to understand that God is in the heart-changing business, that is his specialty, not man's. Have you ever tried to change someone's heart? Well, I tell you, I look forward to our Wednesday night discussion this week. Because I think there'll be a room full of us who have attempted to change people's hearts. And I will be interested to find out if anyone has succeeded. I think we get in Nehemiah the lesson that when prompted by God's grace, we recognize it's not us that work on the hearts of other people. When prompted by God's grace, we know that there is no need to manipulate other people. We know that there's no schemes or games to play. There's no trickery. There's no deception that is necessary. As a matter of fact, when we finally understand that it's all about God, there basically is only one thing that we resort to, and that is we start telling God on people. I know your mom and dad told you not to be a tattletale. But when it comes to the working power of God, we need to start telling God on people. We need to recognize the power's not in us. We don't possess the language. We don't have the tools. That's why it's the foolishness of preaching that causes, God lets save some people, because we don't have what it takes to move the hearts of people. It is not the message, nor is it the messenger. It is the heart of the receiver. And you will find every time that somebody comes to God, it's not because there was a unique message. It's always the message of truth. It's not because there was a more powerful messenger. A messenger is a messenger. A messenger is a messenger. But it's because people's hearts were open. And the very first time that gospel message was preached, what happened to people's hearts? They were pierced in the heart. And they said, what should we do? Tell us what to do. Nehemiah first applies this principle to himself. I cannot change even myself. So Proverbs is a truth revealed that Nehemiah was well aware of. The mind of man makes his plans, but the Lord directs his steps. Boy, we find this just throughout the whole book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah knew this lesson. He first applied it to himself. Then he applied it in his approach to the king, utilizing again the truth of Proverbs chapter 21. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Nehemiah went through that time of fear. He said, I was exceedingly afraid before the king. But he came to a point where he was prompted by God's grace, knowing it's not about me, it's about my God. He reached a point where he knew God can take and he can direct wherever he wants that king to go, like water. Folks, we need to understand the power of that truth. Then he also applies it in his approach to Israel. In chapter 2, so I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I did not tell anyone what God was putting on my heart to do for Jerusalem. I'm going to recognize this is not about me. It says I take a few men, and when does he take them? In the darkness of night. And he goes ahead and describes they stumble around the city. They stumble around in the dark. He's not trying to make it about him. So that's the first lesson of grace prompting I think we get from Nehemiah. Secondly, the prompting of grace includes the principle of patient waiting. Of patiently waiting. Okay, I've got 3 progressive questions. Number 1, have you ever prayed until you learned to just wait? We live in a society today. We like our instant pudding, our microwave popcorn. We like things that happen quick and fast. We're not used to waiting. Society doesn't breed waiters. But have you ever prayed until the answer that you thought you were getting was wait? Have you ever prayed until you learned to wait? Now here's the next progression. Have you ever prayed, learned to wait, and then prayed until you released the issue. Prayed and pray and pray for an answer. Nothing happens. You wait, you learn to wait. But you continue to pray. You continue to petition. You continue to bare your heart. But now what happens is you do this so long and you've learned to wait that you're able to go, I'm just going to release this. It's really not that significant. Here's the last question. Have you ever prayed, learned to wait, released, and then completely abandoned the issue to God? Just completely left it with God. Wow. That is what grace prompts us to do. I can tell you this last week seems like it was a lifetime. And many of you understand exactly what I'm talking about. But on the grand scale of things, do you realize that within 22 hours, Troy went from the door of eternity to being treated by human medical people and his problem addressed in 22 hours. And he goes home this afternoon. What right do I have to talk about waiting? Huh? Yeah, that's unusual. And that's part of what we thank God about and we praise Him for. But I'm going to tell you something just on the flip side of that one. I have some things in my life that I have prayed about that were issues that I had to learn to release, that it took 4, 5 years to abandon, to let God take care of it. Folks, we are prompted within the book of Nehemiah to learn to wait. We mentioned last week that Nehemiah prays and then he waits. He basically has 5 months in which all he has done is prayed. And that's exactly how he responded. He prayed, he waited for months. Now, notice what happens when the moment comes. The king has asked him, what's going on? Why is your face sad? This can't be illness. It's just got to be a sadness of heart. And here's how Nehemiah responds. The king asked, well, how can I help you? Now, I'm going to tell you how I would have answered. I would have had it all figured out. How about you? I mean, obviously, Nehemiah's been praying about this. He's been processing this. He's gone through, where he would like to see Jerusalem. Obviously, he's gotten things in his head. We know that from what follows. But what does Nehemiah do when the king point blank says, what can I do to help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven. He prays again. He doesn't start down the list. His first response is to turn it to God. The man who has waited is still willing to wait. At the very second, at the very moment, when it appears in human wisdom that door has been opened. Nehemiah had so completely abandoned this issue to God and into the hands of God that when the opportunity came to him, he returned to God before he responded to the king. Thirdly, grace prompts us to make sure that we make adequate progress. Paul wrote and warned the Romans about a grace that didn't produce any kind of progress. Should I continue to sin that grace may abound? And he says that's not the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be progressing. Grace that is prompting us moves us to progress. Nehemiah's grace-prompted progress included developing a personal vision of the need and assessing what to do. He looked things over, he processed, he was motivating himself. Here's what happens, Nehemiah chapter 2. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the dragon's well, and on the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down and its gates which were consumed by fire. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. I want you to sense how motivating this must have been to the spirit of Nehemiah. He's dreamed about this city being rebuilt. He's heard about the condition of the city. And now here he is in the darkness of night. Earlier he has talked about there's a few men that he takes with him. But he's riding his donkey through the rubble of Jerusalem. And he gets to a point where even his donkey can't make it through the trash. And so he dismounts, and he himself is walking this path of destruction. He is prompting himself to proceed, to have progress in what his heart is leading him toward. But he also utilizes the same tool to inspire Jerusalem's leaders. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, and the officers, or the rest who did the work. Then I said to them, you see the bad situation? You see the bad situation? Now he's, I've got to move on. I have been motivated. I have seen the condition. Now I need to move it to others. And so he begins. You see the condition? You see how bad this situation is? Do you get a vision of this with me? Then finally, he moves on to challenging the people. And we find that this is, again, granted great success by the grace of God. Come, he says, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so that we will no longer be a reproach. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. And then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. They had progress because of the prompting of grace. Okay, the last thing that I see in the book of Nehemiah that grace prompts is an understanding to prepare for opposition. To prepare for opposition. And we'll get more into this later in greater detail, but just initially let me share this with you. It is really naive for us to believe that there'll be no opposition to grace-prompted activities. You know, like the wise preacher that said every morning he started in his prayer life, and part of what he prayed that day is, God, help me make plans for the devil. Because he's going to be there. He's going to do something. Nehemiah anticipated opposition, and he received it. A couple of examples. I said to the king, this is before he left, I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that I may be allowed to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forests, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates, for the fortresses which is by the temple. And the king granted them to me because the good hand of my God was on me. I'm preparing for opposition. Give me some letters. And then also, but when Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this you are doing? You are rebelling against the king. So I answered them and said, the God of heaven will give us success, not the king. The God of heaven will give us success. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. We're going to do what we're going to do. God's going to give this success. He prepared for the opposition. Okay, so within the book of Nehemiah, we find grace prompting. It prompts humanity from the very beginning. Creation should prompt us to look to the God of grace. Nehemiah, the person of grace, is prompted by the grace of God to recognize that God is the changer of hearts, not him. That there are benefits, strong benefits to waiting. that there is a need to progress, and also that there should be an expectation for opposition. So far, who's winning the bet? Mandy whispered to me before I came up here, we have bets on whether or not you can make it through this morning without crying. God puts into our lives experiences that should prompt all of us to look to the need for His grace. I am not so naive as to assume that experiences of mine will motivate you. Experiences of mine will motivate me. But my experience can motivate me to proclaim a message that perhaps will ring a bell in an experience of yours, which may motivate you to be prompted by the grace of God. And so I want to end with this question. What makes you right now, today, secure? Mark shared some things in class about our world and how we have many different tentacles that meet needs so that people can feel secure. Right now, though, what makes you feel secure? Is it what you know? You know, I'm not just talking spiritual things. You know, there are some of us that are so driven to know things. We want all the answers. We want a complete understanding. And, you know, we want to understand politics and politicians. And good luck. We want to comprehend everything that is comprehensible. We want to trust in our knowledge. We want to find security by knowing. Do you know what Solomon said? He said, I set my heart to know wisdom. And what did he say it was? Futility, vanity, nothing there. It doesn't give us security. You know everything you need to know. And you know what? You're still not going to be secure. So if it's not what you know, then is it what you have? Is it what you have makes you secure? If you have a house, does that make you secure? You're driving a new car, does that make you secure? You got a checking account with lots of money in it? Do you have retirement? Does all that bring security? Is that where your security is? Does what you do make you secure? Is your security based on the fact that you're employed, that you have a job, you get your self-esteem because there's value in what you're able to accomplish and do? Are we secure because of what we think we do spiritually? Now, the danger of that one is we usually translate it into behavior. Does my behavior make me secure? My spiritual behavior, does it make me secure? Did I drag myself out of bed this morning and say, you know, today's church day, got to go to church, you know, put on my good clothes, and our behavior is what we think is going to make us secure? Obviously, I've seen a lot of head shaking. None of those things bring us security. First of all, Corinthians says that knowledge puffs up. And the word from the master is, I know my sheep, and they know me. You know what the most important thing to know is? Jesus. It's the most important knowledge you can possess. You know what the most important thing to have is? Jesus. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Most important thing. And do you know what the most important thing to do is? To serve that Jesus. Not with a list of behaviors that you deem important, but with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. To find your security in Him. That's it. That's where it's at. To watch your daughter find such security in her husband's faith that she can be secure even if he leaves her, because she knows her security is not in him. To watch parents struggle over a son's physical condition with the belief and the knowledge security lies elsewhere. What is making you secure today? Now, that's just my experience. I'm not going to motivate you. It reminds me of the story of the guy that had 3 sons. He was a faithful Christian. 3 sons were they were the farthest thing from Christian that you could be. He'd been praying for them to be Christians all his life. He ends up sick. He's in the hospital. The three sons come and visit. They leave that afternoon. One of the boys is bit by a rattlesnake. Barely able to get the antidote, save his life. He becomes a Christian. All three boys back in the hospital visiting Dad. He says, well, before you guys leave, I need to pray. So he prays and he just thanks God for his obedient son. And then he ends his prayer. And dear Lord, send us 2 more rattlesnakes. I hope God sent you a rattlesnake. I hope it's not my experience. I hope you've had the experience that causes you to recognize he needs to be your security. If you've been playing church, it's time to get serious. If you've been refusing to obey because you'd rather serve Satan, it's time to get serious about where security lies. We have a cemetery right back here. There's a little watery grave just ready to transport you into a new life. If that's your need, why not start today to stand on those promises? Because that's where security is.